Montana Territory, 1887. Winter had laid its cold, merciless hand upon the frontier, turning the rugged landscape into a treacherous expanse of white desolation. For Jacob Thorne, the 25-year-old foreman of the Silver Creek Ranch, winter had always been a season of solitude and survival, nothing more. The vast emptiness of the Montana wilderness only reinforced what life had taught him since childhood. Attachment was a liability on the frontier, and a man stood strongest when he stood alone. The weak December sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered range as Jacob guided his chestnut gelding along the perimeter of Silver Creek's northern boundary. His breath clouded before him, crystallizing in the frigid air as he pulled his wool scarf higher across his clean-shaven jawline. Despite his youth, responsibility had etched subtle lines at the corners of his eyes, giving him a weathered look that belied his years. "Easy there, Thunder," he murmured, patting the horse's muscular neck as the animal snorted and pawed at the snow. 3 years as foreman had taught Jacob to trust his instincts, and something about the stillness of the day raised the hairs on the back of his neck. The cattle had been restless at dawn, and Jacob had learned long ago that animals sense trouble before men did. His employer, the aging rancher Edward Montgomery, had dismissed Jacob's concerns with a wave of his gnarled hand. "Boy, you worry too much, it's just the weather changing. Been ranching 40 years and never seen a cow predict anything worse than snow." But Jacob knew better. His mother had died of fever when he was 8, his father in a range dispute 3 years later. By 14, he was on his own, working cattle drives and learning that survival meant vigilance. Attachments got a man killed on the frontier, or worse, got those he cared about killed instead. The sky darkened as he rode, heavy clouds promising another punishing snowfall. He should turn back, but something drove him onward past the line shack that marked the northern boundary. Thunder tossed his head nervously. "Just a little farther, boy," Jacob assured the horse, scanning the tree line. That's when he saw them, footprints in the snow, small and uneven, leading from the trees toward the abandoned trapper's cabin a quarter-mile beyond ranch property. The tracks were fresh, partially filled with newly fallen snow, but clear enough to tell they belonged to a woman. In these mountains, 20 miles from the nearest settlement of Willow Creek, a woman alone meant trouble. Jacob dismounted, pulling his Winchester rifle from its scabbard. He'd seen what happened to settlers who ventured unprepared into Montana winters. Even a strong man could freeze to death in hours. A woman alone stood little chance. Might be nothing, he told himself, but knew he couldn't ride away. Regardless of his belief that entanglements brought only pain, he couldn't leave someone to die in the wilderness. Not when he had the power to help. Following the tracks, Jacob's mind conjured possibilities, none good. Perhaps a settler's wife gone mad with cabin fever. Or worse, an escapee from one of the brothels in Willow Creek, lost and desperate. Either way, it spelled complications he didn't need, with Christmas less than a week away and a blizzard brewing on the horizon. The cabin came into view, a dilapidated structure with a partially collapsed roof. No smoke rose from the stone chimney, but the footprints led directly to the door. Jacob approached cautiously, years of frontier vigilance guiding his movements. "Hello," he called, rifle at the ready. "Anyone inside?" Silence answered him. He pushed the door open with his boot, wincing at the agonized creak of rusted hinges. The interior was dark, cold, and smelled of damp and decay. As his eyes adjusted, he made out a shape huddled in the corner, a woman lying motionless on the dirt floor, covered by a threadbare blanket. Jacob crossed the small space in 3 strides, kneeling beside the figure. He reached out, turning her gently. Her face, though smudged with dirt, belonged to a young woman no older than 22. Dark blonde hair spilled from beneath a simple bonnet, and her skin held an alarming pallor. For a terrible moment, Jacob thought he had found a corpse, but then her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes the color of summer cornflowers. "Don't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please." "I am not going to hurt you," Jacob said, setting his rifle aside. "My name is Jacob Thorne, foreman at Silver Creek Ranch. You need help." Her eyes widened with fear, then confusion. "I can't go back," she managed before a fit of coughing overtook her. Jacob noticed the torn hem of her once fine dress, the quality fabric now soiled and damaged. Her hands, though chapped and dirty, showed no calluses, not a working woman's hands. The pieces began to fit together in his mind, a young woman of means running from something or someone. "You will die here," he said bluntly. "The temperature will drop 20 degrees by nightfall. I need to get you to shelter." When she tried to protest, Jacob made a decision that would alter the course of both their lives. He removed his heavy coat and wrapped it around her slender frame, then lifted her into his arms. She was light, too light, suggesting days without proper food. "I cannot go to town," she whispered against his chest. "They will find me." "I am taking you to Silver Creek," Jacob replied, carrying her to where Thunder waited. "No one will look for you there." As Jacob settled her in the saddle and mounted behind her, supporting her limp form against his chest, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The uncomfortable weight of responsibility for another human being. It went against everything he believed about survival on the frontier. Attachments were dangerous. Entanglements got people killed. Yet here he was, holding a stranger's life in his hands just days before Christmas, following tracks that led not just to a fallen woman, but perhaps to the undoing of all his carefully constructed defenses. The storm broke as they rode, snow falling in thick, blinding sheets. Jacob hunched forward, shielding the woman with his body as Thunder picked his way carefully back toward the ranch. The young woman drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally murmuring fragments that told Jacob nothing useful about her identity or circumstances. Night had fallen by the time they reached the ranch house, the windows glowing with lamplight against the darkness. Jacob dismounted carefully, lifting the woman into his arms. She felt even lighter now, her breathing shallow and rapid. "Mr. Montgomery," Jacob called as he kicked at the door. "I need help." The door swung open to reveal Montgomery's housekeeper, Mrs. Fletcher, her lined face registering shock at the sight before her. "Good heavens, what on earth?" "Found her in the old trapper's cabin," Jacob explained, pushing past her into the warmth of the house. "She needs warmth, food, and dry clothing." Montgomery appeared in the doorway of his study, spectacles perched on his nose and ledger still in hand. At 65, his once imposing frame had begun to stoop, but his eyes remained sharp and assessing. "What is the meaning of this, Thorne?" "She was alone, sir, would have frozen by morning." Montgomery stepped closer, examining the young woman's face. His expression softened momentarily before hardening once more. "And what would possess a young woman to wander into the wilderness alone in December? Nothing good, I would wager." "With respect, sir, that does not matter right now," Jacob replied firmly. "She needs care." "Mrs. Fletcher intervened, her practical nature asserting itself. "Bring her to the spare room, Jacob. I will see to her needs." Jacob carried the woman up the narrow staircase to the small bedroom at the end of the hall. As he laid her gently on the bed, her eyes opened briefly, focusing on his face with startling clarity. "Thank you," she whispered before slipping back into unconsciousness. Those two simple words unsettled Jacob more than he cared to admit. Gratitude created obligation, and obligation was just another word for attachment, as Mrs. Fletcher bustled in with towels and a basin of warm water. Jacob retreated to the doorway. "I will check on the stock," he said, already withdrawing. "The weather's turning worse." "Jacob Thorne," Mrs. Fletcher called after him. "You cannot just bring this poor creature here and then wash your hands of her. What is your plan?" Jacob paused, realizing he had acted on instinct without considering the consequences. "Keep her comfortable. When she wakes, we will learn her story and decide what to do." Mrs. Fletcher shook her head. "And if Mr. Montgomery decides she should be sent to town, to the authorities?" The thought troubled Jacob more than it should have. "We will cross that bridge when we come to it." In the barn, as Jacob unsaddled Thunder and rubbed the gelding down, his mind returned repeatedly to the young woman. Her fear had been palpable, not just the fear of someone lost in the wilderness, but of someone hunted. Jacob knew that look. He had seen it in his own eyes after his father's murder when the men responsible still roamed free. "This is not your concern," he told himself firmly. "Get her well enough to travel, then send her on her way." But even as he spoke the words aloud, Jacob knew something had shifted within him. The woman's footprints had led not just to her, but to a crossroads in his carefully ordered existence. And he had made his choice the moment he lifted her into his arms. The following morning dawned clear and bitterly cold. Jacob had slept poorly, his dreams haunted by images of the young woman freezing to death in the snow while he watched, paralyzed. He rose before dawn, completed his morning chores, and returned to the house just as Mrs. Fletcher was preparing breakfast. "How is she?" he asked, trying to sound merely concerned rather than anxious. "Fever broke around midnight," Mrs. Fletcher replied, placing a stack of hotcakes on the table. "She is weak but lucid, said her name is Juliana Blackwell." "Juliana," Jacob repeated, the name feeling strangely significant on his tongue. "Did she say anything else, where she came from, why she was out there alone?" Mrs. Fletcher gave him a shrewd look. she has been most reticent about her circumstances. Perhaps she will speak more freely to her rescuer. Jacob ignored the implication. Mr. Montgomery up yet? Gone to town early, something about business at the bank. The housekeeper hesitated. He said to tell you he expects the girl gone by the time he returns tomorrow. Jacob nodded, unsurprised. Edward Montgomery was not an unkind man, but he was practical to a fault and wary of strangers. A mysterious young woman appearing on his property represented complications he would prefer to avoid. After breakfast, Jacob found himself standing outside the spare room, strangely hesitant to enter. Finally, he knocked softly. "Come in," called a gentle voice. Jacob opened the door to find Juliana sitting up in bed, her blonde hair neatly braided and falling over one shoulder. Clean and rested, she was strikingly beautiful, with delicate features and those remarkable blue eyes. Mrs. Fletcher had provided one of her own nightgowns, too large for Juliana's slender frame but clean and warm. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice stronger than the previous day, "I must thank you for saving my life." Jacob removed his hat, suddenly conscious of his rough appearance. "Any decent man would have done the same." "Perhaps," she replied with a sad smile, "though my experience suggests decent men are rarer than one might hope." The statement hung between them, laden with unspoken history. Jacob found himself wanting to know that history, despite his better judgment. "Mrs. Fletcher says your name is Juliana Blackwell," he said, remaining by the door. "Where are you from, Miss Blackwell?" She hesitated, eyes dropping to the quilt covering her lap. "St. Louis originally, more recently Helena." "That is a long way from here," Jacob observed. "Especially on foot in winter." "I did not begin on foot," she said carefully. "I had passage on a stagecoach to Willow Creek, but circumstances required me to continue my journey unexpectedly." Every word she spoke raised more questions, but Jacob recognized the careful construction of her explanation. She was revealing as little as possible. "You understand I cannot help if I do not know what danger you are in," he said directly. Juliana looked up sharply. "I never claimed to be in danger, Mr. Thorne." "You did not need to. I recognize fear when I see it." A long silence stretched between them as they assessed one another. Finally, Juliana sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "My stepfather arranged a marriage for me," she said quietly. "To a business associate 3 times my age. When I refused, she trailed off, one hand unconsciously rising to her cheek, though no marks were visible. "I fled. He has men searching for me." Jacob frowned. A father cannot legally force a marriage. A father, perhaps not. A stepfather with powerful friends and documents, naming him my legal guardian until my 23rd birthday. I found my options severely limited. Bitterness tinged her words. "I will be 23 on December 26th, one day after Christmas." The pieces began to fit together. "So you are running until your birthday, when you can legally refuse." Juliana nodded. "I have an aunt in San Francisco willing to take me in. I just need to evade capture for a few more days." Jacob processed this information, weighing it against his instinctive distrust of entanglements. The simplest course would be to give her money, provisions, and directions to the nearest train station, yet the thought of sending her back into the wilderness alone troubled him deeply. "Mr. Montgomery wants you gone by tomorrow," he said finally. "He has concerns about harboring a young woman of uncertain circumstances." Juliana's face fell, though she quickly composed herself. "Of course, I understand completely. I have imposed enough already." "I did not say I agreed with him," Jacob found himself saying. "There is a line shack on the northern boundary, basic but warm and stocked with provisions. You could stay there until after Christmas, then continue your journey when you have your legal freedom." The hope that flared in her eyes made something shift in Jacob's chest, a sensation both unfamiliar and alarming. "You would do that for a stranger?" she asked. "I would do that for someone who needs help," he corrected, trying to maintain emotional distance. "But you would need to remain out of sight. If your stepfather's men come asking questions, it would be better if no one at the main house knew your whereabouts." Juliana studied him as if trying to discern his motives. "Why would you risk trouble for me, Mr. Thorne?" Jacob wished he had a simple answer. Instead, he fell back on practicality. "Winter on the frontier kills the unprepared. I would not have that on my conscience." It was not the whole truth, but it was all he was prepared to acknowledge, even to himself. That evening, after ensuring Montgomery had retired for the night, Jacob helped Juliana to the kitchen. Mrs. Fletcher had left clothes, a simple wool dress, two large but serviceable and sturdy boots. While Juliana ate a hearty stew, Jacob outlined his plan to move her to the line shack the following morning. "I will check on you daily, bring supplies," he explained. "It is a mile from the main house, isolated but secure." Juliana listened attentively, her quiet dignity impressing Jacob. Many women of her apparent breeding would be complaining bitterly about such rustic arrangements. Instead, she seemed genuinely grateful. "You have gone above what duty requires, Mr. Thorne," she said when he finished. "I will not forget your kindness." "Jacob," he said abruptly, "if we are to maintain this deception, you should call me Jacob." A smile touched her lips. "Then you must call me Juliana." The simple exchange felt strangely intimate, a small breach in Jacob's carefully maintained defenses. He stood quickly, uncomfortable with the warmth spreading through him. "Get some rest, we leave at first light." The following morning, Jacob saddled Thunder and a gentle mare named Daisy for Juliana. He had prepared carefully, packing provisions, extra blankets, and even a few books from his personal collection to help pass the long hours of isolation ahead. They rode out as dawn painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Juliana sat straight in the saddle despite her recent illness, handling the mare with unexpected skill. "You ride well," Jacob observed as they picked their way across a frozen stream. "My father taught me before he died," she replied. "He raised horses on our farm outside St. Louis. After he passed, my mother remarried, and my stepfather sold the farm and horses to finance his business ventures." The bitterness in her voice revealed more than her words. Jacob found himself wanting to know more about her life, the experiences that had shaped her into this resilient, determined young woman. "And your mother, she supports your stepfather's plans." Juliana's expression clouded. "My mother died last winter, influenza. With her gone, there was no one to moderate his ambitions for me." The familiar pattern of loss resonated with Jacob's own history. Perhaps that explained the unwelcome connection he felt toward her, the protective instinct that had overcome his usual caution. "I lost my parents young as well," he offered, surprising himself. He rarely spoke of his past. Juliana glanced at him, genuine interest in her eyes. "Is that why you came west?" "Partly," Jacob admitted. "After my father was killed in a range dispute, there was nothing holding me in Kansas. I worked cattle drives until I landed at Silver Creek 3 years ago." "You have built a good life here," she observed. Jacob considered this. "A stable one," he corrected. "The frontier does not allow for much beyond survival." "Is survival enough?" Juliana asked softly. "Surely there must be more to life even on the frontier." The question penetrated deeper than Jacob expected, touching the lonely core he worked hard to ignore. Before he could formulate a response, they crested a small rise, bringing the line shack into view. "There it is," he said, grateful for the diversion. "Not much to look at, but solid enough." The cabin was indeed humble, a single room built of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney and small porch. Inside, a narrow bed occupied one corner, a cast-iron stove another. A table with two chairs stood in the center, while shelves along one wall held basic supplies. Jacob built a fire while Juliana explored the small space. Despite its plainness, the cabin was clean and weathertight, a sanctuary against the Montana winter. "It is perfect," she declared, warming her hands by the growing fire. "I cannot thank you enough." Jacob busied himself explaining the stove, the location of firewood, and how to operate the pump outside for water. The domesticity of the scene struck him as surreal. He, who had avoided attachments of any kind for so long, now establishing a woman in what amounted to a temporary home. "I will return tomorrow with more supplies," he said finally, running out of practical matters to discuss. "If trouble comes, there is a cellar trapdoor beneath the rug, small, but you could hide there if necessary." Juliana stepped closer, her blue eyes serious. "You are taking a risk for me, why?" The directness of her question caught Jacob off guard. He should offer some practical explanation, maintain the emotional distance that had protected him for years. Instead, he found himself speaking a truth he had not fully acknowledged even to himself. "Because you remind me that there are things worth protecting in this world, even on the frontier." The words hung between them, more revealing than he had intended. Juliana's eyes softened, and for a moment Jacob feared she might reach for his hand. Instead, she simply nodded. Then I will try to be worthy of that protection." Jacob left shortly after, riding back to the ranch with conflicted emotions. He had compromised his principles of non-involvement, risked his position at Silver Creek, all for a woman he barely knew. Yet he could not bring himself to regret his decision. That evening, as he sat alone in his quarters above the stable, Jacob realized with startling clarity that his carefully constructed philosophy of isolation had never been tested, not by genuine human connection. He had built walls to protect himself from loss, but those walls had also kept out possibility. The question Juliana had asked, "Is survival enough?" echoed in his mind, challenging assumptions he had held for years. The following days fell into a pattern. Jacob would complete his morning duties at the ranch, then ride to the line shack with supplies and news. Each visit lasted longer than the last, as conversation flowed more easily between them. Juliana shared stories of her childhood in Missouri, her dreams of one day returning to raise horses like her father. Jacob, to his own surprise, found himself revealing pieces of his past he had never shared with anyone. 3 days before Christmas, Jacob arrived at the cabin to find Juliana attempting to decorate the sparse interior with pine boughs she had gathered. "Christmas was always special in our home," she explained somewhat sheepishly. "Even here, I wanted to observe it somehow." Jacob watched as she carefully arranged the greenery along the mantel. Something about her determination to create beauty in such humble circumstances touched him deeply. "Wait here," he said suddenly. When he returned from Thunder's saddlebags, he held out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I was going to save this for Christmas Day, but perhaps it will help with your decorating." Juliana unwrapped the package to reveal a string of dried berries and popcorn Jacob had painstakingly assembled the night before, remembering his mother's Christmas decorations from his childhood. "Jacob," she breathed, genuine delight illuminating her face. "It is perfect." As they hung the simple garland together, their hands occasionally brushing, Jacob recognized a dangerous truth. He was falling in love with Juliana Blackwell. The realization should have sent him retreating behind his emotional barricades. Instead, he found himself lingering until dusk, reluctant to leave her company. That night, as snow began falling once again, Jacob sat before the fire in his quarters contemplating the transformation taking place within him. The belief that had guided him for years, that attachment only led to pain, was being dismantled day by day. In its place grew something fragile but persistent: hope. On December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas, Jacob rode into Willow Creek for supplies. The small frontier town was festooned with modest holiday decorations, and the general store bustled with ranchers and townspeople preparing for the holiday. As Jacob was loading his purchases into Thunder's saddlebags, a conversation from the nearby saloon caught his attention. "Offering $500 for information," a deep voice was saying. "Young woman, blonde hair, blue eyes, name's Juliana Blackwell, runaway from her family in Helena." Jacob froze, hand tightening on the saddle horn. Peering cautiously around the corner, he observed two well-dressed men speaking with the bartender. Their polished appearance marked them as out of place in the frontier settlement. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description," the bartender was saying. "But that's a powerful lot of money. What did this gal do?" "Family matter," the taller man replied smoothly. "Her stepfather is worried sick. Girl's not right in the head, ran off before her wedding. Could be dangerous to herself." Jacob's jaw clenched at the lies. These were the men Juliana feared, painting her as mentally unstable to facilitate her capture. The deception confirmed her story and heightened his concern for her safety. As the men continued their inquiries, moving toward the general store, Jacob mounted Thunder and rode casually out of town in the opposite direction. Once out of sight, he urged the gelding into a gallop, racing against time and his own growing fear. At the ranch, Jacob rushed to the stables, transferring supplies to a pack mule and saddling a fresh horse. Mr. Montgomery emerged from the house as Jacob prepared to leave again. "Going somewhere, Thorne?" the older man asked, suspicion evident in his tone. "Northern boundary check," Jacob replied, keeping his voice steady. "Storm damage to repair before the next snowfall." Montgomery studied him with narrowed eyes. "You have been making a lot of boundary checks lately. Anything I should know about?" For a moment, Jacob considered confiding in his employer, but Montgomery was a practical man who avoided complications, exactly what Juliana represented. "Just being thorough, sir. Winter's the time fences fail and stock strays." Montgomery nodded slowly. "Be back for Christmas Eve supper tomorrow. Mrs. Fletcher insists the whole ranch attend." I will do my best, Jacob promised, knowing it might be a promise he could not keep. At the line shack, Juliana greeted him with a warm smile that faltered when she saw his expression. What has happened? Your stepfather's men are in Willow Creek, Jacob said without preamble, offering rewards for information about you. Claiming you are mentally unstable. The color drained from Juliana's face as she sank into a chair. Thomas Rutledge will not give up easily. The marriage he arranged would have given him control of my inheritance. Inheritance, Jacob asked, surprised by this new information. My father's horse farm was built on land that proved to have coal deposits, Juliana explained. The mining rights alone are worth a fortune. As my guardian, my stepfather controls the income until my birthday, but cannot sell the property without my consent as the legal heir. A husband with the right papers could consent on my behalf. The pieces clicked into place, so this marriage was never about you at all. Only as a means to an end, Juliana confirmed bitterly. Mr. Vaughn, my intended, is a business associate of my stepfather's. The arrangement was to be quite profitable for both of them. Jacob paced the small cabin, mind racing. We need to move you. If they are offering rewards in town, someone might remember seeing me ride this direction. Where can I go? Juliana asked, her composure remarkable despite the threat. It is only 3 more days until my birthday. Jacob considered their options. The ranch offered no safe hiding places, not with Montgomery's suspicions already aroused. The nearest town where she might catch a stage or train was 2 days' ride through dangerous winter conditions. That left only one possibility. The old mining cabin in the high country, he said finally. It is remote, difficult to access in winter. No one would think to look there. How far? Half a day's ride, but treacherous terrain. We need to leave now before dark. Juliana rose immediately, gathering her few belongings with efficient movements. I am ready whenever you are. Her calm courage impressed Jacob anew. Most women of her upbringing would be weeping or panicking at the prospect of fleeing into the mountains in winter. Instead, she faced the danger with quiet determination. They rode out within the hour, Jacob leading the way on his fresh mount, Juliana following on Daisy, the pack mule trailing behind. Snow had begun falling again, which Jacob counted as both blessing and curse. It would cover their tracks, but also make travel more dangerous. The path to the mining cabin rose steadily into the foothills, following game trails and narrow passes. By mid-afternoon, the storm had intensified, visibility dropping to mere yards ahead. Jacob reached back to take Daisy's reins, leading both horses carefully along the treacherous path. Not much farther, he called back to Juliana, whose face was nearly hidden beneath her scarf, snowflakes clinging to her eyelashes. She nodded, too cold to speak. Jacob felt fear not his stomach, not of Rutledge's men, but of the deadly cold that could claim Juliana's life more efficiently than any pursuer. When the cabin finally appeared through the swirling snow, Jacob nearly sagged with relief. Unlike the line shack, this structure had been abandoned for years, since the silver vein in the nearby mine had played out. He helped Juliana dismount, her limbs stiff with cold, and quickly broke the ice-crusted lock with the butt of his revolver. Inside, the cabin was freezing but intact, dust covering the simple furnishings left behind by the miners. Jacob worked quickly, building a fire in the stone fireplace while Juliana unloaded supplies from the pack mule. As warmth slowly filled the small space, Jacob tended to the animals in the attached lean-to, ensuring they were protected from the worst of the weather. When he returned, Juliana had removed her outer layers and was melting snow in a pot for tea. We are safe here for now, Jacob said, stomping snow from his boots. The storm will hide our tracks, and no one knows about this place except old-timers from the mining days. Juliana handed him a cup of steaming tea, her fingers brushing his. You have risked everything for me, your job, your safety. I would do it again, Jacob said simply, the truth of it resonating deep within him. They sat before the growing fire, the howling wind outside making the cabin seem both precarious and precious in its shelter. Jacob found himself studying Juliana's profile, the graceful line of her jaw, the determined set of her mouth. She had endured so much, yet retained a fundamental gentleness that moved him. When this is over, he said suddenly, what will you do? Juliana stared into the flames. Go to San Francisco as planned. My aunt will help me secure my inheritance and rebuild my life. She glanced at him. And you? Will you remain at Silver Creek? The question carried implications neither was ready to voice aloud. Jacob had built his life around avoiding attachments, yet here he sat, more deeply connected to Juliana than he had been to anyone since his parents' deaths. I have not thought beyond keeping you safe, he admitted. Juliana turned fully toward him, firelight playing across her features. Jacob, I cannot ask you to upend your life for me. When Christmas passes and my birthday comes, this will be over. You must return to your life and I to mine. The practical truth of her words struck Jacob like a physical blow. Of course she would leave her life, her inheritance, her future lay elsewhere. What could he offer to compare with that? A foreman's position on a Montana ranch was hardly enticement for a woman of her background and prospects. Yet the thought of her departure created a hollow sensation in his chest that no rationalization could fill. Sometime during their brief acquaintance, Juliana had become essential to him in ways he was only beginning to understand. Perhaps, he said carefully, when this is over we might discuss other possibilities. Hope flickered in Juliana's eyes before she looked away. That would be unwise. You have a life here, I have responsibilities elsewhere. Is that truly how you feel? Jacob asked, needing to know if her reluctance stemmed from practicality or lack of reciprocal feeling. Before she could answer, a sound outside caught their attention, the distant whinny of a horse barely audible above the storm. They froze, eyes meeting in sudden alarm. Could be nothing, Jacob whispered. Wild horses sometimes shelter in these hills. But instinct told him otherwise. Rising silently, he moved to the window, carefully wiping frost from a small section of glass. Through the swirling snow, he could just make out shapes moving among the trees, at least 3 riders approaching cautiously. They found us, Juliana breathed, coming to stand beside him. Impossible, Jacob insisted. No one could have tracked us through this storm. Yet the evidence was before his eyes. Somehow, Rutledge's men had followed their trail, perhaps hiring local trackers familiar with the terrain. The mine, Jacob decided quickly. There is a tunnel connecting to this cabin, used during winter storms. We can hide there until they pass. Gathering only essentials, blankets, lantern, water, they moved quickly to a low door at the rear of the cabin. It opened to reveal a rough-hewn tunnel disappearing into darkness. The sound of voices outside spurred them forward, Jacob leading with the lantern, Juliana close behind. The tunnel widened as they moved deeper, opening into the main shaft of the abandoned silver mine. Support beams creaked ominously overhead, and the air held the damp, earthy scent of long confinement. Stay close, Jacob cautioned, finding a small alcove where mining equipment had once been stored. If they search the tunnel, we can retreat deeper into the mine. They huddled together in the darkness, Jacob extinguishing the lantern to avoid detection. The cold was penetrating, and he wrapped a blanket around Juliana's shoulders, drawing her against his chest for warmth. Her breathing quickened at the contact, but she did not pull away. I am sorry I brought this trouble to your door, she whispered, her breath warm against his neck. Jacob tightened his arms around her. You have nothing to apologize for. In the intimate darkness, with danger lurking just beyond, the barriers between them seemed to dissolve. Jacob found himself stroking Juliana's hair, offering comfort that quickly transformed into something more profound. When she tilted her face upward, he could just discern her features in the faint light filtering from the tunnel entrance. Jacob, she whispered, his name a question and invitation combined. He lowered his head slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished. Instead, she raised a hand to his cheek, guiding him the final distance until their lips met. The kiss began gently, an exploration of newfound territory, but quickly deepened with the urgency of feelings too long denied. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Jacob pressed his forehead to hers. I have fought this feeling since the moment I found you, he confessed. As have I, Juliana admitted. I told myself it was gratitude, admiration, anything but love. The word hung between them, powerful and frightening in its implications. Jacob had spent years believing love was a liability on the frontier, yet here in this dark mine, with danger literally at their doorstep, he recognized it as the greatest strength he had ever known. If we survive this, he said, I want to build a life with you, Juliana, here San Francisco, anywhere, the where does not matter. Tears welled in her eyes, visible even in the dim light. Do you truly mean that? With all my heart. Their second kiss sealed the promise, a commitment more binding than any legal document. When sounds from the tunnel interrupted them, footsteps and muffled voices, they were prepared to face the threat together. Jacob positioned Juliana behind him, drawing his revolver. Stay back. If anything happens to me, go deeper into the mine. There is another exit on the far side of the mountain. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the glow of approaching lanterns. Jacob aimed carefully at the tunnel entrance, finger poised on the trigger. "Jacob," a familiar voice called, "you in there, boy." Relief washed through him as he recognized Edward Montgomery's voice. "Here, sir," he called back, lowering his weapon. Montgomery appeared in the tunnel, lantern held high, accompanied by the ranch's cook, who doubled as their best tracker. Behind them came Mrs. Fletcher, bundled against the cold but determined. "What in tarnation are you doing hiding in this godforsaken hole?" Montgomery demanded, his gruff tone belied by the concern in his eyes. Jacob explained quickly about Rutledge's men, Juliana's situation, and their flight to the mine. As he spoke, understanding dawned on Montgomery's weathered face. "Those men who came asking questions," he nodded, "said they were cattle buyers looking for strays, didn't believe them for a minute, hands too soft for cattle work, when Mrs. Fletcher told me about finding a young woman's nightgown in the laundry, pieces started fitting together." "How did you find us?" Juliana asked, stepping forward to stand beside Jacob. Mrs. Fletcher answered, "Jacob has been riding north every day for a week. When those men came snooping, and then Jacob rode out in a hurry with supplies, it was not hard to guess something was amiss. Mr. Montgomery insisted we follow to ensure your safety." "And those men," Jacob asked tensely, "sent them on a wild goose chase toward the Canadian border," Montgomery said with grim satisfaction. "Told them we had reports of a woman matching that description headed that way. They rode out an hour ago." Relief flooded through Jacob, momentarily weakening his knees. Juliana's hand found his, fingers intertwining in silent gratitude and affirmation. Montgomery observed the gesture with raised eyebrows. "I see there is more to this story than a simple rescue." "Yes, sir," Jacob acknowledged, standing straighter. "I intend to ask for Miss Blackwell's hand, if she will have me." Juliana's grip tightened, her answer clear in the gesture. Montgomery harumphed, but his eyes held a glimmer of approval. "Well, cannot say I am surprised. Never seen you risk your neck for anyone before, Thorne. Must be something special about this young lady." "Something very special," Jacob agreed, looking at Juliana with undisguised affection. "Then I suggest we all return to the ranch," Montgomery said practically. "Storm's letting up and Christmas Eve is tomorrow. Seems to me we have cause for celebration beyond the usual holiday festivities." As they emerged from the mine into the clearing night, stars beginning to appear between parting clouds, Jacob helped Juliana mount Daisy. The air was crisp and clean, the world transformed by the fresh snow into a landscape of pristine beauty. "It appears we will have a proper Christmas after all," Juliana said softly, her face luminous in the starlight. "Better than proper," Jacob replied, reaching across to take her hand. "The first of many together." Christmas Eve at Silver Creek Ranch was unlike any Jacob had experienced in his years there. Mrs. Fletcher outdid herself preparing a feast, the dining room festooned with evergreen boughs and candles. Montgomery, initially gruff about harboring a fugitive, had warmed considerably to Juliana after hearing her full story. By evening, he was regaling her with tales of the early days of Silver Creek, treating her like the daughter he had never had. As they sat around the fire after dinner, Montgomery cleared his throat. "Been thinking about those expansion plans we discussed, Thorne. Time to put them in motion." Jacob looked up in surprise. They had discussed adding a breeding operation to the ranch for years, but Montgomery had always been hesitant to make the investment. "The north section would be perfect," Montgomery continued. "Good water, sheltered position. Need someone to oversee it properly, though, someone who knows horses." He glanced meaningfully at Juliana. "Heard tell you have experience with horse breeding, Miss Blackwell." Juliana straightened, genuine interest lighting her features. "My father's farm was renowned for its quarter horses. I learned the business from him since childhood." "Thought as much," Montgomery nodded. "Well, seems to me Silver Creek might benefit from your expertise, and that north section would need a proper house, of course. Something suitable for a foreman and his wife, should he be inclined to marry." The implication was unmistakable. Jacob looked from Montgomery to Juliana, hope rising within him. "Sir, are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting that talent should not go to waste," Montgomery said gruffly, "and that Silver Creek has room for expansion in more ways than one. The details are for you two to work out." It was as close to a blessing as the old rancher would give, but it was enough. Juliana's eyes shone with unshed tears as she looked at Jacob, the future suddenly opening before them. Later that evening, as snowflakes began to fall once more outside the windows, Jacob led Juliana onto the porch. The world was hushed and peaceful, Christmas Eve casting its special magic over the ranch. "I know this is not what you planned," Jacob said quietly. "Your inheritance, your aunt in San Francisco." Juliana placed her fingers against his lips. "Plans change, my inheritance will still be there and can fund our horse breeding operation here. As for my aunt, she can visit us in Montana. You would stay, build a life here." "I would build a life with you anywhere," she replied simply. "But here seems perfect. The footprints that led you to me were not random, Jacob. They were leading us both home." Jacob reached into his pocket, withdrawing a simple ring, his mother's wedding band, the only possession he had kept from his childhood. "It is not fancy," he apologized, "but it is given with all my heart." "It is perfect," Juliana whispered as he slipped it onto her finger, "the most beautiful gift I could receive." As they sealed their engagement with a kiss, the church bells in distant Willow Creek began to toll, announcing the arrival of Christmas Day. For Jacob, who had believed the frontier allowed no room for love, it was the beginning of a new understanding, that even in the harshest landscapes the human heart could find its home. By the following Christmas, a new house stood on the north section of Silver Creek Ranch. The horse breeding operation was thriving under the joint expertise of Jacob and Juliana Thorne, with their first foals expected in the spring. Montgomery, rejuvenated by the expansion, spoke of Silver Creek's future with renewed enthusiasm. Sometimes, on winter evenings, Jacob would stand on their porch and look toward the distant mountains where he had once found footprints in the snow leading to a fallen woman. Those tracks had long since vanished, but the path they revealed to love, to family, to home, remained the truest he had ever followed.